the last speaker, but definitely not to be recognized that way. He's just as important as every speaker that was up here. And that is Fred Levine. Fred served from 1942 to 1946, U.S. Army. He's an officer, a lieutenant, and he also was an acting captain. Fred served in Luzon, which I probably pronounced wrong, the Philippines, and Japan. Fred was with the 1st Cavalry Division and has unit citations. Fred, would you please come up?
World War II was a significant time in the life of our country. Up until then, we were an also-ran. But then, during the war and after the war, we became #1 in the world, and we still are #1 in the world, no matter what they say about China or any other competitors. We're the best in the economy, in the military, and everything else, and the world doesn't make a move without the United States approval. In 1941, I just graduated high school and went to the University of Cincinnati co-op program because that was a time when you could work your way through school. There were tough times then. At that time, I think 1939, we had 37,000 men or women under arms. Only 37,000. Later on, we had 16 million during the war. And I had 5 jobs at the time to work my way, and they had a co-op program. I was working for Wright Aeronautical in the metallurgy department. Every 3 months, you made a shift from going to work for a business and going to school. Well, that was in December 7th, Pearl Harbor. Everybody was asking, where's Pearl Harbor? Nobody knew. We got a deal from the government that we could join something called the ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program, where they sent you to engineering school. I had a chance to go to medical school, but I didn't want to go. So my first place was the infantry. Then, since I had 3 months of engineering, in chemical engineering, they sent me to the engineering school. And then I went to chemical warfare, became a sergeant in chemical warfare. And then I went to officer candidate school at Fort Belvoir, engineering, and then was sent overseas. While we were going overseas, there was a battle with a Japanese submarine. There were some destroyers around our ship, and then I don't know what happened. They were dropping death charges and firing guns off and everything else. I was what you call the youngler. The youngler got all the jobs that nobody else wanted. My job was to censor all of the mail. That was #1. Also be advance party, make sure the ship was in good condition before the troops came on it. And we stopped off at the Marshall Islands. There was a little action over there. And then we went to Ulithi, where they had a lot of Navy ships. We went down the line. There must have been hundreds of ships there, everything you can consider. Aircraft carriers, battleships, destroyers, cruisers, submarines, everything. Just mile after mile and mile, just showed how strong our country had become. And it was a time when the whole country acted as one. We never had any opposition during World War II, which changed quite a bit recently. Then ended up in the invasion of Luzon. In Luzon, we built the bridges across the Pasig River. The place, Manila, had been completely destroyed. It was just like an open field. There was nothing standing. And then the Japanese had killed about 100,000 civilians too. They're scattered all over. I was with an engineering aviation battalion. So we were part Air Force and part Army. Our job was we went to Clark Field where the aircraft were, and we worked there. And I had a job, they gave me another job to be in charge of the road system from Manila to Apari, which was about 200 miles. I was a young kid then, 21 years old. I had 75 men that were under my command. We had 2 tanks and 2 half-tracks to protect us. We had a division that was, I think it was the 25th Division, and we were firing guns, big 220 millimeter guns, a few miles away, and you couldn't sleep at night. The Japanese would come down every once in a while on their raids, and at one time, the leader of the Japanese was a captain, and I grabbed the captain. Turned out that he was on the staff of General Yamashita, who was the one responsible for the Bataan Death March. Later was hanged. And so then brought him to S2, and he told them where Yamashita was, and based on that they got Yamashita. My colonel called me and said, "What do you want, the Bronze Star or Presidential Unit Citation?" I said, let's take the Presidential Unit Citation and take the Bronze Star. All right, then my job also was any men that were killed. I had to gather up all of their belongings, send a letter of condolence to the people that were their family, and then, you know, I was 21, 22 years old. I mean, you know, I was in charge of, they made a lawyer out of me. We had a lot of rapes and burglaries, so I had to be in charge of that. Also, inspecting everything, the kitchens, the latrines, everything else. That was my job. So I got pretty active. Okay, time came to invade Japan. We got our orders, we got our maps. The maps were printed on silk, and we were supposed to go in on D-1 to clear the beaches at Kyushu, Sasebo, Kyushu. So I looked them over, and then we were ready to go. It was supposed to be November that we were going to invade. As it turned out, they dropped the A-bomb. Now people say, well, they shouldn't have done it, this and that. I will tell you, that was the most important thing that the United States could do. We saved hundreds of thousands of men, Japanese and Americans. On the way to Japan, I understand in 1200 AD, the Mongols were going to invade Japan. And there was the Japanese prayed for a wind, a violent wind that would destroy the ships. They had thousands of ships. It did come. Okay, we were on our way to Japan. The typhoon of the century hit us. We were on an LST, which is a small ship, landing ship tank. We had all of our equipment there, bulldozers and graders and all that stuff. We were hit with the typhoon of the century. Winds of 150 miles an hour, waves breaking over the mast of 60 foot high, 60 and 70 foot high, and our ship was bobbing around like a cork. I remember I was up in with the captain on the bridge at the time, and he said, you know, these LSTs have a way of breaking in half during storms. That's all I had to hear. Well, luckily we made it through. We got through to, this was off the island of Okinawa. We got through to Japan, the Kyushu, Sasebo. We came into Sasebo Harbor, and we saw where we were going to invade. About 300 foot of beach and about 200 foot high cliffs. Would have been a headache to have invaded there. In any event, a Japanese destroyer came out. We figured, well, World War III again. Men were standing there lined up in whites, and they saluted us and had an American flag flying from the mast of the destroyer, welcoming us to Japan. When I was in Japan with the 1st Cavalry Division. Well, first of all, we built an airfield, one of the largest airfields ever made in Kyushu. I think they were considering there was going to be a war with North Korea, so we built a big airfield there. And then I moved on to, and then I became adjutant, which was second in command to my battalion of about 400 or 500 people. Our commanding officer was never available, so I had a job of assigning all these works and keeping a log. You have to keep a log every day of your actions. We built the airfield in the winter, and the wind was coming down from Siberia, and I ended up in a hospital with malaria and pneumonia, temperature of 107. And they wrapped me in ice, and I finally survived. While I was there, one guy was going to jump out of a window. I grabbed him, and a lot of things were happening. Then the engineering battalion that I was assigned to was demilitarized, and I had the job of demilitarizing about 4 different groups.